186, 101, 95, 50, 105, 32, 13, 66, 43, 27. Up to and including the Corio exorcism, these were the outcomes of Melbourne playing the eventual Premier. All were losses, and most were batterings. On average, they struggled to come within 12 goals of the team that would lift the precious cup come the end of the year. Melbourne had split honours with their grand final foes in 2021, but their loss was in the most recent bout, and Melbourne were now, in essence, homeless vagabonds. This wasn't the first time Melbourne had been left without a home due to circumstances beyond their control. In 1884, their grandstand burned down, plunging them into financial turmoil and severely threatening their existence. Only an amalgamation with the MCC saved them, and they soon got back to competing for premierships. Now, they'd face a similar hardship. Locked out of their home state, their first home qualifying final since 1998 was played in Adelaide. Fitting, since Adelaide themselves once played a home final against the Demons at the MCG, the result of which can only be described as typical for both clubs. The universe continued to play its funny little scheduling game, pitting their preliminary final in the same state that their last one was, and we all remember how that one ended. But so far the Demons had taken all these challenges in their stride, which shouldn't have been surprising. Remember how the Dees were weird about the teams they beat? They were also weird about where they beat them. That last-minute loss to the Crows was their only blemish in away games, despite the fact that their home record was worse than a team that finished 10 positions under them. Now it was time to face an opponent whose last grand final triumph until 5 years ago had been against the Demons. And, in that first quarter, Melbourne put a leash on the Dogs. Here is where we truly see Ruse and Goodwin's fingerprints all over this masterpiece. Rusey's first draft pick, Christian Salem, was everywhere early, turning defence into attack. Ed Langdon, one of the Fremantle Four, made his wing a dog-free zone. Goodwin's other masterful trade capture, Ben Brown, provided Melbourne's only scoring in the second when the chips were down, with another inaugural Ruse recruit in Harms providing valuable inside toughness. Bailey Fritsch, initially brought in as Hogan's SPAC filler, had 3 goals halfway through the third. Stephen May and Jake Lever were holding down key targets admirably, with only 1 goal scored by the Dogs' tall forwards. But it wasn't working. Yeah, in the first they monstered the Bulldogs, but Adam Treloar and Marcus Bontempelli had put the game on their backs, booting 6 goals combined essentially as midfielders. Caleb Daniel turned into a hoover at half-back, and, after half-time, Jason Johannesson did this. Momentum well and truly shifted. We get to this point, 10 minutes left in the third. The Dogs are up by 3 goals, with the smallest and tallest players on the ground battling for the ball. Who wins this bout? If you guess the club captain with a 38cm and 39kg advantage, think again. Caleb Daniel gives Max Gawn the stare down. This is the turning point. This is where ascendancy has been made abundantly clear. Move or you will be moved. The Dogs' bark and their bite seemed overpowering. In 1872, Larry Bell, a patron of the club, had brought some red and blue stockings back from England for the team to use as a proper uniform, and it was decided that red would be Melbourne's colour. Thus, the nickname Redlegs was coined, something Norwood would actually copy some 5 years later. Funnily enough, that blue set would be given to these guys. In the 1910s, this moniker was joined by the Fuchsias. A mix of red and blue, how clever, ha ha. But kinda silly, and obviously for me, kinda hard to say. And that's where this man comes in, Frank Checker Hughes. After the 1932 season, he was a Richmond icon. Already a two-time Premiership player, he just steered the squad to his first flag as coach. But his good friend Percy Page had left his secretary position to join the Fuchsias in that role. Hughes was convinced to follow him, and history was made in two ways. Firstly, he won 4 premierships, 2/3 of Melbourne's tally to that point, if you count that one in 1900 where they won by accident. The second was more permanent. Upon coming to the club, he was unimpressed by the club's lily-white image, having just come from a hard and tough Richmond squad featuring a man nicknamed Captain Blood. So he did the only logical thing. He sacked 13 guys and gave the rest an epic spray. Seemingly angered that they were named after a kind of delicate-looking plant life, legend says he told them, quote, "You are playing like a lot of flowers. Lift your heads and play like demons." Demons? That sounded cool. Not only did the spray work, but the nickname stuck. And right now in 2021, the Melbourne boys are playing like a lot of flowers. Gawn had just been sat on his ass by a small child who played with a special protective helmet for Norm's sake. They had to lift their heads and, well, play like demons. So, of course, the resulting throw-in leads directly to a Melbourne goal and... Wait, what? If we look at it again, it's a list of names we've seen already. Jackson of the 304, Harms a Ruse OG, Pickett another of the 304 with the Shepherd, and then the bloke hired as a second fiddle to the great Red and Blue Hope, who goes back for his 4th on Grand Final day. Then things go a bit nuts, actually. And here's where we get to talk about that other bloke from the 2015 draft, who actually kicked the first goal of proceedings. Christian Petrarca immediately became an integral part of the Melbourne lineup. Seriously. From the day he was drafted to Grand Final night, he missed 28 games. That's not bad, especially for a young developing midfielder. But from his debut to this point here, he missed 1. He was an inside midfielder who loved the goal from a stoppage but went unheralded on Brownlow night until 2020. He had bulked up to over 95 kilograms, which is heavier than the similarly tall and famously rotund Mark Prosciutto ended his career. The new Bruiser Cruiser suddenly became a clearance machine and had evolved into a dual-threat midfielder, acting in perfect tandem with Oliver, Harms and Viney, with Brayshaw spending more time on the flanks. This continued into 2021, with his stats evolving into ridiculous numbers. He and Oliver combined for 13 3-vote performances, but ultimately cost each other a legitimate Brownlow chance. And on Grand Final day, his influence had been wider around the ground. But, moved into the stoppages with Jackson rucking, he was about to explode. 2 centre clearances, 3 inside 50s, and a beautiful assist straight from the middle right after that Daniel Gawn play. And then he did it again, immediately. It was this goal here that ended it for the Bulldogs, a beautiful dribbler from a tight angle. If it missed, would the Dogs have hung on? I don't think so, but this goal was a prelude to this piece of play, and then this decadent icing that topped a red and blue cake, and all of this came within 54 seconds of game time. These marked 4 goals from consecutive centre clearances, and Petrarca was leading the charge. This 54-second spell took 3 minutes in real time, and it was unlike anything even in Melbourne's own demolition 10 years before. Sure, Geelong scored at least 4 goals from centre clearances, but not in a row. From half-time, 6 of Melbourne's 16 goals came within 2 minutes of a previous goal, and all 16 came within 51 minutes of game time. They had domesticated the Dogs. Daniel, who stood down Gawn, who looked like the Norm Smith medalist half an hour ago, coughed the ball up to the real Norm Smith medalist, Christian Petrarca. He let Salem slip away and score. The man who had 26 disposals to half-time got got only 11 more for the game and was the epitome of the Dogs' day. They had tried valiantly, but they had spent all they had. From this point, stopping the Demons was like stopping the tide from coming in. Melbourne were a force of nature, and they were scoring at will. When Melbourne had hit their nadir in 2020, an opportunity had presented itself. Their next two matches were against the worst teams in the league. They weren't just in freefall anymore, sinking eternally. They had run aground at the bottom of the footballing sea. A win against Adelaide was virtually guaranteed, but with one term to go, they only hold a tenuous 2-goal lead. The Demons looked mired, stuck, glued to the bottom. They needed to free themselves. When a ship gets caught on the seabed, particularly in old historical maritime scenarios, the only agency one had to free themselves was by getting the crew to run from one side of the vessel to another as fast as they could to shift its weight. In effect, this is a form of what's called healing. So, Melbourne did that, and then did that some more. And when they had the option to stop, they didn't. They only needed maybe 3 goals to save their souls. They scored 7, including 2 bursts of 3 in 5 minutes. At this rate across a whole game, they would have scored 180 points, a whole 10 goals clear of North Melbourne's season best against the same pathetic opposition. It was like healing a boat using 50 Jonah Lomus. They didn't just get loose, they rocketed up the river. I say this because over the next 30 games, Melbourne only had 4 such healings. The very next week against North to save their season, earlier this season to save both their perfect start and their minor premiership, and today. They were stranded in their most crucial hours, but they knew that only if it was necessary, they could rock themselves free. They could heal by healing, and they did it like no other team could. On that fateful 2011 afternoon, Geelong scored at a rate of 2.92 points per live minute, or in other words, excluding stoppage time. Melbourne blitzed that in the last quarter and a half of 2021, scoring 3.45 points per minute. If you score at that rate for a full game, you would end up with 276 points. Despite only scoring a behind in the opening 16 minutes of the half, their 101 points in the final half alone could have won all of these grand finals, and is second all time for grand final points in a half. The players celebrated hard. They'd won, convincingly, and their theme song blared out across the Perth skyline. It was a song written 110 years before, based on a US military anthem back when they were the Redlegs, with a solitary mistake of a premiership to their name. A second verse was added nearly 30 years later, brought back into prominence on the 100th anniversary of the song's adoption. It symbolised the new Demons' resurgence of the late 30s, but acknowledged past triumphs and also the club's old identity. It tied everything together and was rather brilliant in its simplicity. Its writer was a man who, in an ironic twist, was killed in a training exercise with the very military the original song blindly propagandises. I bring Keith Bluey Truscott up for a triad of reasons. Firstly, of course, the revival of his work fits very much within our timeline. Secondly, his 1930s New Demons share stark similarities with our 2020s Neo Demons. And, thirdly, the way he was honoured, with Melbourne's best and fairest being struck in his honour. 2021's winner was this man, joining 6 others in becoming 3-time winners. But only 2 of those men did what Truscott's New Demons did, winning their 3 consecutively. The first, an indisputable legend of the club. We've covered him. The second, I've waited till now to talk about. As the fans revelled in the Smith-Barassi curse ending, and as neutrals such as myself shed a tear watching Neil Danaher celebrate the victory he himself came so close to leading his beloved Demons to, and as the players honoured Troy, Jim and Dean, the most pivotal man behind all of this, sits over 3,000 kilometres away in a Melbourne hospital with his wife, quietly watching his Neo Demons parade the cup around Perth. I stretched the truth a bit earlier. Max Gawn wasn't the only man on the 2011 list to lift the 2021 cup. I got Tom McDonald's career span mixed up with his brothers, and even though he, unlike Gawn, hadn't made his debut prior to the cryo-exorcism, he was still on the list. I forgot about him, so sorry, Tom. History won't forget him though, as he joined Max Rook and Toby McLean in kicking completely meaningless post-siren scores while their teammates were busy celebrating. So there's his story arc, a defender called on to replace a man destined to be a generational talent, kicking a couple in a drought-breaking flag. But that's not what I brought this point up for. There was another on that 2011 list who missed out by inches. Someone who, despite going completely unmentioned to this point, was the key to all of this. Without him, none of this would have been even remotely possible. Allow me to introduce you to Nathan Jones. He played on that day in Geelong. Even in his 109th game, he was the 5th most experienced Demon. 13 Cats that day had played more games, but only 4 would beat him over their careers. The cryo-exorcism had shown Jones something though. He had seen how good a football team could ever get. He had to raise his game to their level, and he did. Instantly. Despite his role staying fundamentally the same, his end to 2011 had a higher potency. He took that momentum and just ran the hell with it. He won his 3 best and fairests immediately after that, out of sheer will. He could have flown by at 50-60% and still been Melbourne's best, especially in 2012 when their second best ball winner was a key back. But he didn't. He became their leading ball winner, leading creative outlet and leading physical presence. During his Bluey wins, the Demons mustered 10 wins. Jones polled 33 Brownlow votes in that time, at 3.3 per win. That's Gary Adler at the Gold Coast territory, and he won the damn thing. Look at Jones's 2014, a clanger percentage of 8 as a 600 disposal inside mid in a team with 4 wins is stupidly good. The only guys with more effective disposals per game all won Brownlows, Premierships or Fantasy Peak status. Post-exorcism Jones was a jet, both in that he flew high and often carried a whole bunch of passengers. But you don't thank or really acknowledge a jet for getting you to your destination. And it was the same for Jones, a no-fuss, no-frills operator in a team that was unwatchable for the best part of a decade. He was unspectacular, work-a-day and matter-of-fact in everything from his playing style to his leadership to his media appearances to even his fantasy scoring. And that was exactly what Melbourne needed. If you're making, I don't know, a sculpture or a model or something, you can have the most extravagant, the most brilliant, the weirdest, or even the absolute worst pieces you can find. You can position them, stack them, and try and make a unified whole. But good luck making anything significant or long-lasting. You need something to hold it all together. Nathan Jones was not like his statistical contemporaries. He wasn't the centerpiece to a testament of inadequacy. He was the glue, holding the club together so it could rebuild and grow stronger and stronger and stronger until it found glory. In the cryo-exorcism video, I called him Melbourne's games record holder because he was going to be, surely. It was August, and he had played the first 7 games before an injury break. He played game 302 the day before I recorded that original audio, in round 15, 20, 21, as an unused medical sub. He only needed 4 more appearances to match the legendary David Neitz. But number 302 would be his last. He battled to get back into a competitive side as the Demons' second and third stringers stepped up their game. But there was a chance, an ever so slight chance, that he would feature in the grand final. Fans were clamouring for him to be the medical sub, to send him off in the manner he deserved. But, ever the noble, self-sacrificing clubman, he eschewed the opportunity entirely to be with his wife as she gave birth to twins. He left right after the Demons secured their place in the grand final, announcing to his teammates that his career was done on the way out, and made it to the berth by a matter of a couple of hours. Due to COVID travel rules, he was now stuck in Victoria for at least 2 weeks. No grand final for him. So, the captain of the club for 6 years, who won best and fairest in 3 consecutive seasons, retired before the big dance and missed the only match in his 16-year Demons tenure that actually mattered. It was a decision even his captain, the mighty champion of the Neo Demons, admired, saying that Jones was a bigger man than he was. No small words, as we've established, Gawn is huge. Don't be sad though. Not only was it a decision that Jones has no regrets over, but that's just the way the Demons work. Jones plays 302 games for no success, and Jake Bowie plays 17 and wins all of them, including the big dance. And those wins, by the way, took Jones about 4 times as long to get. After all, Jones was the glue. And although glue doesn't belong in a trophy cabinet, it sure as hell helps in putting one together. For Jones, as the man who had touched a football more than any other Demon, created more goals than any other Demon, defended harder than any other Demon, and achieved it all during the worst part of this club's history, he had made more of a mark than any of the 23 Neo Demons who lifted that cup in Perth. He had fallen before authoring the final part of a great legacy, much like the man whose medal he had earned through the leanest of their years. But the Demons played for Jones, and indeed all their fallen warriors. Steins, Danaher, Broadbridge, hell, even Bluey Truscott. Much like his own new Demons, the Neo Demons played fine like the year 39, and had been there at the final bell with the spirit of 26. They played for all those who'd given their all in the lean years without reward, and for the fans who'd been with them on every leg of the journey, bar the $3,500 cross-country flight to Optus Stadium. The Melburnian fans didn't get a parade until December, and even then, some of them got fleeced. In true Demons fashion, the team had basically returned home right as everything went, wrong. Even so, though, most were just happy to see their grand old high-flying flags gain new company, especially after such a bumpy ride to their ascendancy. In fact, I wonder what Simon Goodwin had to say about... oh, for God's sake. But the weirdness surrounding all of this didn't ruin the Demons' coronation. It added to it. That's what this club's all about though, right? It's never been about the result, really. It never has been. Even before the 2021 shellacking, and even including a draw and 2 4-point wins, the average margin of a Melbourne Grand Final was 7 goals, more than any other team with 5 or more appearances. Now, as it should be for the most inconsistent club of the era, it's always been about the journey, even at the beginning. In 1900, it was abusing the farcical final system to fundamentally change the sport. In 1926, it was recovering from 3 coaches in 3 years to finally taste glory intentionally. In 1939 and the early 40s, it was the arc of completely changing their identity. In 1948, it was dealing with losing the mercurial Fred Fanning. In the 50s and 60s, it was all about building an empire. In 1988, it was all about revenge on Gary Buckenara, which they didn't yet. In 2000, it was trying to take down the best single-season team in league history. And in 2021, well, it was this. Rebounding from an outright embarrassment, the lowest point perhaps in club history, starting from the bottom, rising, falling, and ultimately rising to the top, sinking the boot into the team that started this all along the way. It's a very them story, really. It's the best way that I can describe it, at least. From the Carayo exorcism to the demonic ritual, It was a story that only the Melbourne Demons could ever tell. So, should old acquaintance be forgot, and keep your eye